Russia is guilty, says the European Court on Human Rights. Ukrainian culture theft banned in 14th sanctions package. Notorious Russian generals Shoigu and Gerasimov joined their master in unholy ICC indictment trinity. Good afternoon. All these topics in more detail in today's daily wrap-up on UATV English with me, Henry Keane, as usual, doing my best to break the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. It is indeed a historic victory of Ukraine, and it happened in Strasbourg. The European Court of Human Rights published its final decision in the Ukraine against Russia case regarding Crimea as victorious and historic, no doubt about that. The court satisfied the absolute majority of Ukraine's demands and recognized the existence of not only human rights violations, but rather the aggressor's systematic and criminal nature of them, which started and continued since February 2014 until at least September 2022, when the European Court has stopped its own jurisdiction over the Russian Federation. Among other things, the European Court of Justice, established in relation to the statement submitted in 2014-15, the fact the Russian Federation violated the human rights to very life in Crimea. In easy terms, it were those disappearances of locals and the lack, or better said, absolute absence of the effective investigations of these cases. The court stated the aggressor's cruel treatment of all of them, whether it is Ukrainian military personnel or ethnic Ukrainians or Crimean Tatars, by the way, as well as journalists. It's violation of human rights, no less. The European Court established a violation of the right to freedom of the Ukrainian POVs, Tatars, locals and journalists who were held incommunicado during their detention, and that there was an obvious violation of the property and privacy right due to Russian arbitrary military raids and searches in private residences.
We are certainly satisfied with the decision. We expected the announcement of last 15, maximum 20 minutes, but it lasted half an hour. This is due to the fact that a huge list of articles of the European Convention violated by the Russian Federation was cited. This is certainly a success. Our first positive decision. There were no negative ones, but the first decision on the metric made by the European Court of Human Rights. Accordingly, among a number of our cases against the Russian Federation, we are certainly happy and continue to work. But for example, what was recognized, I was really struck by the list of everything that was stated by the European Court. This includes the disappearance of people and the practice of mistreatment of soldiers, Crimean Tatars, journalists and Ukrainians. This includes arrest of specified categories of persons, raids and searches of private homes, intimidation of religious leaders and searches of premises used for religion purposes. This is pressure and oppression of non-Russian media. This is just short, very to the point.
The European Court found a violation of freedom of conscience in connection with the criminal practice of Russian Federation of persecution and intimidation of religious leaders who do not profess the Russian Orthodox faith, of course, in particular Ukrainian Orthodox priests and imams. Due to military and police raids on places of worship and confiscation of religious property, violation of freedom of speech, suppressing all non-Russian media, all of Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar television stations. The European Court ruled that there had been a violation of freedom of assembly due to banning public assemblies and manifestations of support for Ukrainian or the Crimean Tatar community, as well as intimidation and detention of the organizers. A violation of the right of property due to criminal expropriation without any compensation of the private property of civilians and private enterprises, a violation of the right to education due to suppressing the Ukrainian language in schools and persecuting Ukrainian-speaking children at school. The absence of a legal system of renunciation of Russian citizenship that Russia forced locals to accept was called a crime, and the so-called courts of the occupiers has nothing to do with international law or the European Convention on Human Rights and Freedoms, and so are criminal and illegal. Extremely important is the fact that the European Court ruled that the aggressor discriminated against a whole branch of human rights due to its criminal practice of attacks on the Crimean Tatars. In easy terms, the court stated the fact that we in Ukraine have been aware for ages already. Russia and the law has nothing to do in common. The 14th package of EU sanctions against Putin's version of Russia provides for measures to combat the import and sale of historical and cultural values illegally exported from Ukraine. Well, did I just say illegally exported? I meant stolen. The press service of the Council of the EU has stated exactly that. It is now finally, according to the approved decision, prohibited to purchase, import, transfer and export Ukrainian objects of cultural value and other objects that have archaeological, historical, cultural, religious significance or are scientific rarities, if there are sufficient grounds to believe that they were illegally exported, meaning stolen, from Ukraine. In addition, the sanction package limits the approval of applications for registration in the EU by citizens and companies from the Russian Federation of certain intellectual property rights in response to the steps of the Russian authorities and courts, which unlawfully deprive protection in Russia of the intellectual rights of persons from the European Union.
Our Culture Committee has acknowledged the Russification of Ukraine and the denial of its people's cultural identity. The damage and destruction of monuments in Ukraine further violate the European Cultural Convention, which celebrates its 70th anniversary this year and was also ratified by the Russian Federation back in 1991. The goal of this convention is to develop mutual understanding among the people of Europe and reciprocal appreciation of the cultural diversity, as well as safeguarding European culture. As the postcards show, the Ukrainian culture is rich, diverse, and needs to be protected, not just for the sake of our Ukrainian friends, but for the sake of our common European culture.
What I love personally the most about Russian culture, after stealing the Ukrainian cultural heritage, Russians will talk about great Russian culture, and we'll talk about Gogol, Ayvazovsky, Malevich. All stars of Ukrainian culture were forced to leave Ukraine so as to be devoured, some in literal sense, by Moscow. Great Russian culture really exists, but was never great enough to change anything for the better in Russian national identity itself. And here we go, an army of thieves, murderers and rapists, from the inmate soldiers to indicted chief officers. In addition, the new EU sanctions include measures against Russian liquefied gas and are directed against tankers that are part of the so-called shadow fleets of the Russian Federation. Restrictive measures also apply to the financial message transmission system developed by the Central Bank of Russia as an analog of the SWIFT system. Russian SWIFT system? Really? Working how? On what? On pigeons? The whole idea behind SWIFT is an international, global exchange of data between international, global financial institutions. It makes no sense if it works in one country on one currency. But who needs sense in Russia, right? Russian FSFP, like sending messages around the Kremlin probably. Hey Shoigu, it's me, Putin, did you get your quadrillion rubles? Wait a second, Comrade Putin, I'm gonna check my FSFP pigeon. Also, some ask me, do we seriously expect in Ukraine Russia to defend any intellectual rights of any Westerner in Russia, and we like sanction Russia for this, for the absence of that legal defense? No, we're not. The main idea behind this sanction package is not that we expect Russia to become any better. We have no illusions. We just want to get the perpetrator accountable for their deeds in the future, and that day will come. Just as it did come for two Russian generals, whom we are going to talk about in more detail in our next part of this episode. ICC judges issue arrest warrants on Russian generals Sergei Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov. Well, these two have long deserved their place near Vladimir Putin in The Hague, at the bench. Pre-trial chamber of the International Criminal Court issued warrants of arrest for two individuals, Shoigu and Gerasimov, for alleged international crimes committed from at least on 10th October 2022 until at least 9th of March 2023 in Ukraine. Shoigu was a Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation at the time of the alleged conduct, and Gerasimov, Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation and First Deputy Minister of Defense, who are each allegedly responsible for the war crime of directing attacks at civilian objects and the war crime of causing excessive incidental harm to civilians or damage to civilian objects and the crime against humanity as an inhumane act. There are reasonable grounds to believe they bear individual criminal responsibility for the aforementioned crimes for having committed the acts jointly and or through others ordering the commission of the crimes, and for their failure to exercise proper control of the forces under their command.
Considering that the key factual allegations are duly supported by evidence and other relevant material submitted at the stage of the proceeding by the prosecutor, the Chamber considered that the statutory requirements are met to issue the sought warrants of arrest. The content of the warrants is issued secret in order to protect witnesses and to safeguard the investigations. However, mindful that conduct similar to the addressed in the warrants of arrest, which amounts to violation of international humanitarian law, appears to be ongoing, the Chamber considered that public awareness of the warrants may contribute to the prevention of the further commission of crimes pursuant. Therefore, Pretrial Chamber 2 considered it to be in the interest of justice to authorize the registry to publicly disclose the existence of the warrants, the name of the suspects, the crimes for which the warrants are issued, and the modes of liability. From the press release of International Criminal Court.
Well, the crime they conducted, similar to that addressed in the warrants of arrest, appears to be ongoing. Appears to be ongoing indeed. Of course, it is ongoing after Putin, Shoigu and Gerasimov orders to murder, rape, bomb, shell, tear apart, annex land, abduct children, steal property, burn cities to the ground. It is worth mentioning just one thing here. It may look to some that ICC warrant and indictment is like nothing. It cannot make Shoigu or Gerasimov stop doing what they are doing now. Sure, but what it can do is to play its role when necessary. For example, when someone new comes to power in Russia, and this someone wants to trade with the world. That is when both Russian generals become a valuable collateral of the possible deal. Well, amen to that. That was it for today. For news and updates on Ukraine, stay with Ukrainian media. With us, UATV English, we're going to break the hardest of truth in easiest of terms for you, no matter what. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters. It helps our Ukrainian voice to be heard globally. Stay safe, tuned for more, and stand for Ukraine, just as we stand for you. Believe it or not. Goodbye.